Yo. Welcome back. Welcome back to the Art of Advocacy. I'm your host, Dr. Sheldon L. Eakins. I am excited to be here another Thursday live with you. Have a very special guest. Ms. Carly Spina is here today, so I'm looking so excited for that because, look, we're going to talk about things that we should probably change when we say certain things. And I look forward to this conversation. Now, before we bring on Carly, as always, if you're out there, love to see you say hello. Send us a shout out from wherever you're from. I'm going to read briefly Carly's bio here. Carly Spina has 15 years of experience in multilingual education, including her service as an EL teacher, a third grade bilingual classroom teacher, and a district-wide multilingual instructional coach. So without further ado, I am bringing on the stream Miss Carly Spina. Thank you so much for joining us today. So Carly, it is a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited. I've been watching all the episodes, so I'm super excited to be on here with you.
Oh, the pleasure is always mine. Now, we've been connected for a while, and I know who you are, but I'd love for you to share with our audience a little bit about yourself and what you currently do.
Yes. So I grew up in the Chicagoland area. I grew up as a North Sider, Lincoln Square area in Chicago. Now I am a suburbanite because I love having a parking spot and a little less traffic. But I served as an EL teacher for many years. I was also a third grade bilingual classroom teacher. We had so much fun. I was also a district-wide multilingual instructional coach for 8 schools in the suburbs from pre-K all the way up through 8th grade. That was a blast because I was everybody's teammate in the district. It was great. Loved working with our students and families and all of our incredible staff. And now I absolutely love my job. I am at the Illinois Resource Center, and we are a nonprofit in Illinois, and we provides professional learning to educators, leaders, change agents across the state of Illinois and beyond. And again, just all about serving our multilingual learners, families, enhancing our programs that we have, and really pushing ourselves to continue growing as we support all of the folks that we serve. So best job ever.
Best job ever. Now, where in Illinois? Because I'll be in Illinois August. So I know I'll be in the Chicago area, and I can't remember the name of the other area I'll be in. But yeah, I'll be out there early August.
So I live in Mundelein, which is like almost Wisconsin. It's pretty far up there. And then my office is in Arlington Heights. So like 30 minutes outside of Chicago, not super far.
Okay. Well, we got to have lunch or something, man.
Yes, please.
I have been thoroughly enjoying meeting people in person these days. You know, COVID is kind of dying down just a little bit, and so people are traveling a little bit more. So it's been people I've been connected with for 4 or 5 years, and it's like finally get a chance to meet up in person. So yeah, I look forward to that.
Yes, it's the best. I love going to conferences. I feel like I'm always the person who like sees someone walking by and I'm like, that person doesn't know me, but I am obsessed with them on Twitter. Like they're my Twitter bestie and they don't know it. Yeah. I have to go meet them.
Same way for me. That happens to me as well. Like, oh wait, I know who that is. I got to go over there. Yeah, I love it. And Carly, you did not mention you're also an author.
Yes, I am an author. I have a book out called Moving Beyond for Multilingual Learners. And it is really like my work and my passion in written form. And it really, the book came to me and the title came to me because I really wanted to continue to push my own practice and my own growth with serving our students, our multilingual students. And so I became frustrated as an EL teacher with always being told like the blanket statement of supporting our students was always like, just add visuals. And I'm like, okay, but what else? So that's kind of how the idea of moving beyond really came to be. And so that's the name of one of the chapters in the book, is Moving Beyond Visuals. But then each chapter of the book kind of goes in a different direction of like all the different capacities that we serve as we support multilingual learners. And so there's a chapter on family engagement, and that's called Beyond the Newsletter. And there is a chapter on SEL for multilingual students, and it's called Beyond Inspiration. So each kind of piece goes a little bit in a little bit different direction, but all centered on, the kids that we serve and the families that we serve.
Wow. Okay. Well, if you haven't gotten your copy, folks, make sure you get a copy. Moving Beyond. I'm excited about that because I wasn't familiar with the idea that a lot of people feel like the best way to support multilingual students was through visuals. I mean, tell me a little bit more about your approach to things.
Yes. So I anytime I love going to conferences. Anytime I went down like the vendor area, like all the publishing companies, and like they're selling their lessons and their curricula for schools, they would always say like, and this program also works for multilingual learners. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, why would it not? Wait a minute, what are you implying about my kids? And then they would always say like, okay, well, here's a sample lesson. And then you go through it and they say like, here's all the steps and here's your script you have to read. Because of course we have to read scripts when we teach now, which is a whole other thing. And then you zoom in and they're like, well, here's how to teach the lesson to all your students. And then in this gray box, it says like, here's how to tweak the lesson. And so it kind of perpetuates this idea of our students are like the afterthought. Like, here's how to do this for everybody. And then later you can make your tweaks or you can make modifications or whatever. But I'm like, I really had to kind of double down on myself and like the practices that I inherited as I, started out in teaching. And I really had to do some digging of like, wait a minute, this isn't equitable for the kids that I'm serving. If I'm constantly doing things through a monolingual lens, I am not serving my multilingual learners as I should be.
Okay. So I'm excited because, this book sounds like it's definitely needed. And it sounds like an alternative approach to a lot of things that have, like you said, unlearn. You got to unlearn sometimes. Yeah. This is kind of what I inherited. Which kind of leads me to, the next thing, the main thing I want to talk about today was about the kind of the languages the language that we utilize when we're referring to our students. Yeah. So I kind of want to start there as far as why do you think that we should check our language practices these days?
Yes. So, I feel like if we could be a fly on the wall in any of our spaces, whether we serve in urban communities, rural communities, suburban, like anywhere we are, any grade level, any content we teach, we could overhear a whole lot of language being spoken by the adults in the school system, teachers, leaders, administrators, like every role. And, we could capture a whole lot of really great things. But we could also capture a lot of really problematic statements. And many of these statements, I think, have gone unchecked for years. And it has, again, just kind of perpetuated systems that oppress our students. And sometimes we are saying things out of like a gut reaction, but sometimes it really can illuminate some problematic biases that we have. And again, we all have them. Like, we're human beings, we have them. But we have to kind of do that digging and unpacking of like, oh, wait, like this is, this is a problem.
Sometimes it's school culture, right? It's language norms.
Yes.
So it's things that people just say all the time. This is what we say at our school.
Yes. And it almost is as like, it becomes like a bingo board of like, buzzwords in education. Yeah. That could be a bingo game, like during a staff meeting. But yes, some of these phrases again, and we could just kind of hand them down and we regurgitate them. And then when new teachers, new leaders come into our systems, like they start taking on those language choices too. And it's like, we want to kind of pause it and disrupt it a little bit.
Just a little bit, just disrupt just a little bit.
Just a little bit, just like throw it all in a blender and like change it completely.
Just a little bit. Okay. So, all right. Well, can you give me some examples? What are some things that we are saying?
Yes. So, especially again, like my lens is always that multilingual education lens, and so I've served in a like bilingual settings and dual language settings specifically, and as students are navigating 2 or more languages simultaneously, like their brains are doing a million beautiful things. But sometimes when we sit down and we talk about student data, we'll say things like, "Oh, this student is low in both languages."
Mm.
Whew. And that statement, anytime we say anything like period, like a student is low, period, like that's really problematic, right? Like numbers can be high and low, percentages can be high and low, but children cannot be. And so, we really want to shift that language choice and really like show what's actually happening. Like, no, a student is not low in both languages. They're developing in 2 languages simultaneously. Like, let's call that out and call attention to what the student is doing and like honor that. It's a great thing. And we should highlight that. And so we got to kind of flip that language a little bit.
Let me ask you this question, because I could see somebody arguing, "Oh, well, this is just a matter of semantics." What type of process, or you kind of mentioned bias earlier, what type of process does this change when we change our language?
Language often speaks life to our beliefs and our mindsets. And again, sometimes people will say things like, it's just words, but words have power and like words have impact. And it kind of goes back to those conversations of like impact versus intent, right? Like, well, I didn't mean it like that. Okay, but it can be taken right, by a variety of audiences, by a variety of folks around the table here, in a lot of different ways. So we have to like honor the way that our words can, impact, and it really impacts the way that we serve our students. If we're always talking about them when they're not in the room and we're saying things like they're low or they're not motivated, that really affects the way when we come back into our spaces and we look at a student, we're saying, oh, this student is low. And so I'm going to lower the bar, lower expectations. Or again, I'm just going to keep regurgitating the same conversation of like, oh, that student's not motivated. And it's, again, a source of frustration rather than how am I empowering this child?
It's like, when we say affirmations, right? We say positive things. You stand in the mirror, you say all these positive things. I'm this, I'm that. So if we're saying this about our students in a negative way, imagine what type of process a teacher might take. We're just going to assume unconsciously, right? Yeah. But when we're saying positive things, like you said, they're developing, right? As opposed to, oh, they're low, but no, they're striving, they're aspiring, they're doing these things that are, some people say, approaching. Some people refer to their students in general as scholars, right? There is no student, no, they're scholars. Everyone here are scholars, and just think about the culture that creates, the school's culture that it creates when that type of language is being utilized every day.
Yes. And, I always think about this because, again, like when we gather as educators and leaders around a table and we're talking about like a particular student in mind, and the student's not in the room with us, but we're saying all these things, we're throwing all this language out into the air. What if the child was in the room, or what if their family was in the room with us? Would we still say those things? It just kind of, it gives us a moment of pause, like, oh, like, this is it's a good practice to have that reflective language time and space.
Yeah, I'm definitely, we could keep going on that for a while, but common sense, at the end of the day, like, don't say stuff that, again, someone could fall on the wrong ears and things like that, or someone could tell, it could be someone's cousin, could be someone's mother, like all these things we just don't know. So let's move on. What is maybe something else that we say that we should change?
So a really common phrase that I have overheard over the years, and it's so frustrating, and every time I hear it again, it kind of takes my breath away. Anytime somebody makes a statement about a family or an entire population of families and says a statement like, those families are not involved, that one makes my blood boil.
People still say that, those people?
Yes, those, not even the families, but those families.
Yes.
Like, I am physically going to put distance between myself and that group of families, it kind of just, it stops your heart a little bit. But it's interesting, like when you unpack the term parental involvement, and I always put air quotes because I have issues with the word involvement.
Sure. Me too.
I prefer, instead of parental involvement, I prefer family engagement. Engagement, you think of an engagement ring. An engagement ring, there's a relationship. It goes,
Yeah.
it's a circle.
It's the difference between the, parental involvement is doing to and parental engagement is doing with.
Yes, exactly.
Bottom line.
Exactly. Yes. And it's interesting, like as I talk to educators in different workshops and things, we always, like, I'll say, like, how would you define, parent involvement? And many times people will say, like, well, if the parents are on PTA, or if the parents come to the parent teacher conference. And I'm like, wait, but are we really making entire judgments about families based on those two events? Like, oh, that's alarming, because many times those events are based on privilege.
Yeah.
Like, we are assuming a lot when we talk about, like, the PTA, for example. We are assuming that the family has, number one, transportation, for example, transportation to the school for the meeting. Number one, were they invited to the meeting? Like, truly, were they invited? Because many times it's through email in English only. And we're, families who have Wi-Fi, who have a device, who have English literacy skills. And again, then also have the availability. And then we're saying, oh, they're not on the PTA, they're not involved. Or same thing with parent teacher conferences. Oh, well, they didn't come to that, they're not involved. Like, maybe they didn't have childcare, or maybe, there's a whole lot of reasons. There's a whole lot of reasons. But if we make just that entire blanket, statement about the family, or an entire group of family, then it illuminates again that problematic bias that maybe has gone unchecked.
Here's my thing with that conversation, and I'm not glorifying the whole saying labeling an entire population or entire group of people, but what I am saying is maybe we should consider, well, why is that entire group of people not attending these events that we're talking about? Is there something that we could be doing? See, we often put the blame on the community members, the stakeholders. The school never does anything wrong. And it's like, okay, if you're telling me a whole neighborhood or a whole community is not showing up to this event, or they're not showing up to anything, why is that the case?
Yes, exactly. And what kind of messaging are we communicating to various groups of families? Like, again, it puts that responsibility back on us. Like, we need to do, as a school, we need to do that inner reflection and have that dialogue and make ourselves uncomfortable and say, wow, we're missing the mark here. Like, we're doing something wrong.
Yeah. You can't put it on. If I always used to tell teachers, like, okay, you had the majority of your class, they failed the test. So maybe there's something that we need to think about as far as our teaching approach, because if it's the majority of our class, that's got to be something that we need to reconsider. So I feel the same way. I feel like sometimes we put blame on our families and not consider, well, what are some things that we could do? I was a victim of this as well. Like when as a special ed person, I used to do IEPs, and I plan the meetings right in the middle of the day because it was convenient for me. I was at school, right? I'm at work. So just come on over when I'm at work. But when you start doing them in the evenings, when you start doing them early mornings, and try to do it in like lunchtime when they can come on breaks, as opposed to when it's, I don't have any meetings between 1 and 3 right now, I'm open. Why don't I schedule it for them this time, as opposed to really thinking about, well, what would work best for this parent who I'm supposed to be serving? What will work best for them in this scenario, as opposed to doing what's best for me?
Yes, absolutely. And we often talk about something like that. We call it the affective filter with our students. Like, they have, like, all of us have these invisible walls around us. And when we're stressed or nervous or uncomfortable or anxious, the wall goes up and no new learning can pass. Right. But all of us adults, we have it too. The families that we serve, they have it too. And, like, when we send out like those flyers for, we're having a math night, or we're having a literacy night, and we notice, like maybe this group of families is not coming. And again, like you said, we need to unpack why. Let's like really be strategic and mindful of how we're inviting families. I started to get really real with some of my moms over the years. And like I would ask them for feedback, like, how am I doing? How's my communication? And they gave me such good information, such good feedback. And they one family said, and again, I had families from all over the world. And one of the moms said to me, you know what, Mrs. Spina, I had no idea even like what to wear to this event. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, I wouldn't have even thought of that. And so then as I started to kind of think like through parent teacher conferences, like here, what to do if you're late, you know, text me at this number because I can't answer my phone because I'm in other meetings. Text me at this number. I'm going to wear jeans. I would invite you to dress down. If you need to bring in your other children, please bring them in. I'll have water for you. And if I had another adult like joining the meeting, like an interventionist or a gifted enrichment teacher or whoever, I would also notify them ahead of time so they don't come in like, you know, like, wait a minute, there's like this team of teachers. I thought it was just going to be you and I. So like I had to get really real about lowering the affective filter for the families. Because I was like, I am creating some uncomfortable situations. And I really don't want to do that. I want my families, when they walk into the building, I want them to be like, this is my place. My child is loved here. My family is affirmed here. We are, you know, we're welcome. We're safe here. Like I want that for all of our families.
That's good. That's good. And I'm glad. And I'm happy to hear you say that. So, are there are there other things that we are saying that you would like for, that we really need to consider?
So this one gets said a lot when we're talking about students who are like approaching that middle school age or high school age. We say things that like, this student is just not motivated, like period, as like a character trait. They're just not motivated, period. And instead, like, let's be really specific about what we have found isn't working to inspire this child. So again, like for me as an adult, I'm not motivated by stickers or incentive charts or behavior charts that are very ableist. I'm not.
Public shaming. Public shaming. I
I'm
always
not
say
a
public
fan.
shaming.
So, you know, and when we have like, we get around the table and again, we're having student data meetings and we're talking about kids, you know, particular students in mind. And we say like, oh, they're not motivated. Let's pause that conversation and say, well, can you tell me more about what you mean? What does empower this child? What are their passions and interests and skills and talents? And how can we like take it and invite it into our spaces? And like, let's use that. Let's let this child shine, right? Like, why are we giving her this like statement of like, just very definitive, nope, she's not motivated, period. It's on her. There's like a flaw that she has that we just cannot, like, we're not here to fix children. They're not broken. Yeah. We got to rework that language.
Yeah. The motivation thing, here's the thing I always say. Have you seen this child outside of school? Because I've seen the same quote unquote unmotivated kids on the basketball court, or doing a musical recital,
Yes.
or doing something. So I'm like, is it that they're not motivated because, or is there something else? Is there something they're trying to tell us? Because I don't think it's a personality thing. I think that this child just, maybe for some reason they have other interests that I see them shining in, so they should be able to perform. But how do we bring those outside experiences that we saw, that we observed? How do we bring that and help them relate to that in the content that we're presenting? I think that that's really important.
Exactly. Absolutely. Absolutely.
What are there some other things that we're saying that needs to change?
You know, there's this phrase that I have heard more and more over the last 10 years, and it's the term long-term English learner. And it refers to a multilingual learner who has been in a program, a language learning program, for 5 or more years. And so again, it's not enough that they have a label already of being a multilingual learner, but now we're going to say, now you're long-term. So it's interesting when we make that designation on a student based on like current research. We know like deep level language learning, it's really more like 7 to 10 years of like study and practice and development and all of these things. And
But aren't we long-term English?
Yes,
I
exactly.
still struggle over stuff. Like
Yes,
I'm trying to figure
absolutely.
this out. That's why I'm like, it's throwing me off. 'Cause you're like long term, but I am as well. Like I have.
Exactly. I've been speaking English my entire life, and there's still so many words, phrases, registers that I don't know. There's tons of regionalisms I don't know. There's like content specific vocab. If you throw me in law school, I would be like, I don't know any of these things. I don't know
Yeah.
what you're saying. And it's interesting too, because many of the same people who talk about like growth mindset and like lifelong learning and celebrating that, and then we call students a long term, like, I don't think we call them to their face, but we have that designation and we say like, oh, now it's a long-term learner. But like, why is that a bad thing? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, again, and that should be the norm. It really takes way longer than 5 years. So why are we like, oh, you woke up on your fifth year of being in this program on day one of your fifth year and you're still learning? Well, now you're a long-term language learner. Like, I don't know. It's just
How are they
doesn't seem to
measuring
align.
this? Like, is there? I'm not as familiar. So how do you measure this? They need to. I, I'm I'm
So
curious.
every year, and again, across the state. So I'm in Illinois. We are a WIDA state. So we take an access test, but some states are not WIDA states. They take a different language proficiency assessment. And so those are annual assessments that is like a federal requirement. So any student who's designated as a language learner has to take this assessment. And it tests the 4 domains of language. So reading, writing, listening, and speaking.
Okay.
So it gives a little capture. It gives a little like a level for each of those domains. And each state has their own exit criteria. So right now in Illinois, at like a 6-level scale, our current exit score is a 4.8 composite of all of those domains. So if
Okay.
you take the test over and over for 5 years or more and you don't reach that level of 4.8, then you get like that designation of being a long-term
Oh, so
learner.
they take the average of your 5 tests.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, and then if you're
So
not at
every year
4.8,
you get a new score. And if you don't reach that threshold, then now you are long term. So it's interesting.
so from your perspective, what are some of the problems with this exam, and maybe if you were to make some suggestions, what would those be?
So I think it's so important that we have like, ways to measure language growth, but it is so different than how we measure content growth. And like language development is like this. It looks like this. It's not like a nice little pretty projection, like or trajectory, because language doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's very dependent on situation and context and like level of comfort. So I always give the example, like if you ask me to stand up and talk for 30 minutes about multilingual education, whew, I could talk about it for days. But if you told me like, Carly, I want you to stand up and talk for 30 minutes about the Super Bowl game, and not the halftime show, not the commercials, but like the game.
The game.
I would stand up and be like, they use a football. It's shaped like this. It's brown and it has laces, and the players wear helmets, and they have touchdowns and people clap. And that's like
That's
about
it.
all I could share. But if you were to capture that as like a language measure of my speaking ability, would you say like, oh, she's really limited in her language, in her ability to speak? Well,
Mm.
no, like, so it has to, it's very context based. And again, who I'm talking to, am I talking to a device? Am I talking to my friend? Am I speaking to the first lady? Like my affective filter might go up. I might be very nervous. So language is very special, and as it should be. That's how we communicate.
So the process to me sounds like it's not an accurate reflection of a child's ability to understand the English language.
And that measure is just it's a one time snapshot, of a moment in time,
Right.
for that particular child, for that particular school, school year. We want to give our students opportunities to speak with social language, academic language, heritage language, all of their language repertoire, right? And we want them to use that for a variety of purposes and audiences. So I think it's good to like have progress checks and like monitor language growth, but we can't monitor it in the same type of way.
Okay. Okay. So have you, I don't know if you've seen any research that supports, like, if I read reading comprehension test or something like that, and so let's say I'm learning English, and if I read something that's relatable to me, I can identify with, is reading comprehension, has that been shown as a better measure? Like, you know,
Yeah, so we
does that
often
make sense
talk
what I'm asking?
we often talk about, like, again, like background knowledge and like the difference between like activating background knowledge and building new background knowledge prior to a learning experience. But yes, it's very dependent on that. And many of our assessments, like, I'm not talking about language assessments specifically, but assessments in general, there's a whole lot of bias with what our students are taking tests on. And it's interesting, like, they'll like, oh, we'll give a baseball game example for this math problem. Not
Mhm.
everyone plays baseball. Like, it's the American pastime, right? But like, we're not, we're from all over the world.
Yeah.
And yes, baseball is all over the world too, but not, it's not everywhere. And so there's a lot of like assumptions being made about, about our students and what they experience.
Okay.
And that leads me to another phrase that I often overhear, as we serve students. People have said, like, oh, that student has no background knowledge. Like, again, like, period. Like, not about like, oh, they don't have background knowledge or background experience with baseball, but like, they just have no. What do you mean they have no background knowledge? They have tons. And so if we're looking again as students as like, oh, they're blank slates and we just have to fill these like empty vessels, like, no, our students are already full, complete human beings.
Mhm.
And they have rich experiences. We have to, like, again, like, pause our language, pause our assumptions, unpack that a little bit, like, oh, I need to reflect on this a little bit about my beliefs, about the kids I serve. And then say, like, let me get to know this student and their family a little bit more so that I can, really serve better.
Popsy says background knowledge is dependent on a cultural context. I agree. I
Yes.
agree. Yeah. It's the whole background knowledge thing. It's crazy how people will say stuff like that. And it's just like you said, it's like, not that this child doesn't have background knowledge, they just probably don't know what you're talking about, but
Yes.
they have their own knowledge. And
Yes.
ask them some questions, or let them ask you some questions to see if you know
Yes.
all the stuff they know about. So
Exactly.
yeah, it's one of those kind of situations. Um, what about, okay, we talked about they're not motivated. Are there any other things that you want to add?
There's a few, I feel like sometimes we, when we get around the table, and I'll always encourage folks, like, when you start wanting to have these conversations with your teammates and with your colleagues and, in your schools and in your districts, I would say, like, let's think of the idea of a language norm, setting a language norm for your space prior to, getting involved in like the student data meeting. And sometimes people want to have this conversation at like an all staff meeting, and they'll want to say something like, oh, today we're going to introduce language norms. I would really encourage folks to pause and be really strategic about when they introduce this and how they introduce this. Because if you did this at a whole staff meeting and said, like, today we're going to do this, people would tune out and they'd say, like, oh, I don't talk like that, or I don't say those things, or I don't believe those things. So like, now I'm just going to check my email. I would say have the conversation with a smaller group of teachers. Like, when you have a student data meeting, when you're thinking of one particular student and you bring in multiple perspectives around the table, and then you start to say, like, okay, let's start having this, as we talk about like norms of collaboration today, we're going to start and end on time. Let's also say, let's introduce a few of these statements here, and print them out in advance. And I tell people, like, give it a sense of permanence. So I will create like a paper, and I'll write out the deficit laden statement, like, she's not motivated, period.
Mhm.
And I'll put like an alternate statement, like, how do we empower this child, or like, what do we know about her passions, or something like that. And I would print them out and have like maybe 3, maybe 4 statements. And I'd say, friends around the table, like, we're going to start and end on time. Those are our norms for collaborating. These are the language norms we're going to stick to today. Because again, like when we get into those student data meetings, we often make two lists. We make one list of all the things that the student can't do yet. And then the other list is all the ways for one teacher on the team to like fix, and fix, right? Fill the holes or whatever we want to call it, right? To fix the student. Like one teacher is going to do all these strategies or all these things. So instead, like, let's throw away the list and start with some language norms and say to your teammates, like, I want us to hold ourselves accountable for these statements. And if I say it too, because again, like, I'm a learner here. Like I'm still on this journey myself. I still am like becoming more and more aware of my own biases that I have. Because again, like I'm a white girl with blonde hair and I'm serving students who come from all over the world who don't look like me. So again, it's so important for me, especially to really become more aware. So I'd say to my teammates, like, hold me accountable too. I'm not like abdicating responsibility because I brought the papers. Like, hold me accountable too. And again, like, have the conversation, throw away the list of the things they can't do yet. And like, it creates like a good proactive, meeting. And then at the end of the time, so whatever you go through and whatever you talk about, whatever you plan you set up for that individual student, take time to have like a reflective conversation at the end. How did our language choices today help us better be more proactive or better serve our students? Or like, what are our noticings around that? And that's a really key piece, because many times, like at the end of a meeting, we're all like closing our laptops and running down the hall and trying to get to our next class or pick up the kids from recess or whatever. So having that time for that reflective language conversation is really important.
How often do you think that should happen?
I would say anytime that you get around the table with other teachers about one student in mind, I would say do it every time. And again, maybe it's not 4 statements to unpack. Maybe it's just one. But like just having that as part of like the culture of the school. This is how we communicate. We find that it's important that we are mindful of our language choices because they reflect our beliefs and mindsets about kids. So this is just a practice that we do. And again, it just kind of becomes ingrained. And I'll always say this too, my little sneaky tip for this. Like I'll say, like, print them out. Like I always printed them out on like Astro Brights paper. I love like neon colors. I'll always pick the neon pack, print them out, bring them to the meeting like ahead of time, have them all ready to go. And then accidentally on purpose, leave them there in that space, especially if it's like a conference room where kids don't come in. But leave them there. And then the next team of teachers that comes in to talk about a new student, they'll start thinking like, what is that? Like, I have said that thing. I want to know a little bit more about that.
I like that. That's some good stuff. That's really, I think that's helpful as well. So thank you for sharing that. Carly, you have definitely taught me a lot of things as far as, having this conversation regarding things that we should change as far as our common language. I consider you as providing a voice in leading equity. Do you have a final statement, one word of advice you would like to leave our audience?
I would say no matter what your role, no matter how long you've been in your role, I would just invite you all to step into that space of being a change agent. Don't let someone tell you like, oh, you're new here, or like, oh, wait till you're tenured, or, that's not your role. That's not your lane. Stay in your lane. Don't let anyone deviate, because if you hear that like feedback, that means you're getting somewhere. So keep going, embrace that space as a change agent. You don't have to have a certain title to be a change agent. Like, you already are one. So I just encourage you to embrace that and take breaks and rest, but empower yourself. Give yourself all the good information. Save all the infographics that are the most powerful. Like, keep those things in your back pocket and ready, because conversations will come up and you can just pull it and have it ready to go. But you are a change agent.
You are a change agent. Carly, if we have some folks that want to connect with you, what's the best way to reach you online?
I'm usually most active on Twitter. You can find me at Mrs. Spina's class. That's probably the best way to reach out. So I'm always on there. You can, hit up DMs, all those things. But I love connecting and learning from educators in the field.
All right. Well, Carly, it's truly been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. This was so much fun. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. All right, folks. Hope you enjoyed that conversation, me and Carly Spina together, as we're talking about multilingual students and some of the things that we're saying that needs to change. And I hope that you took some of those examples. The idea of students are low as opposed to them being approaching or they're aspiring. Just the language that we use and the affirmations that we create and how that impacts the way we serve our students. So if you didn't remember anything else, please at least remember the positive language that we can utilize. Our students that speak multiple language, that's a gift that I don't have and I wish I had. So keep that in mind. Remember the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But by all means, keep moving. Let's continue to be a voice in leading equity. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.